lecture in Innovative Poetics. The talk is titled Agitation of a Copper Lyre, Geopoetics of Entanglement Verse Within the Wireless Imagination. It's by Jennifer Scapitone. And then on April 4th at noon in the Morrison Library, Ben Lerner will be reading in Lunch Poems. So without further ado, Claire Marie will be introducing Lindsay Choi. Thank you.
I just want to begin on a personal note by saying that I feel particularly moved to be up here, introducing Lindsay Choi tonight. I first met Lindsay when they were a freshman here at UC Berkeley, in the first creative writing class I ever taught. That would have been January 2015. Now, Lindsay's first book, Transverse, is forthcoming from Future Poem in spring 2020. Their chapbook, Matrices, appeared with Spect Book in 2017. Their work is published in Omniverse, Apogee, The Felt, Bettering American Poetry Volume 2, and elsewhere, including the Berkeley Art Museum's recent exhibit, Way Bay. They have edited a print journal of translations and experiments in collaboration between Swedish and American poets, and are currently working on a manuscript entitled Heliotrope, which engages translation on the colonial history of leprosy in Korea. Lindsay is a Kundiman Fellow and PhD student here at UC Berkeley. From the first moments of meeting Lindsay, I was impressed by their intense intelligence, their seriousness, their way of listening completely, both in and out of seminar, in a way that involved not just hearing information, but completely comprehending and absorbing. Both then as a student, and now, as an admired friend, they had and have the capacity to say the one thing that opens onto light in conversation, the comment that goes beyond jargon or mystification and brings real insight. Their poetry feels like this to me too. Transverse opens with a dedication which directs itself in multiple directions. Quote, for my teachers, beginning with my parents, for those unmappable coordinations. The book acknowledges the unmappability of the coordinations. The book dedicates itself to them without attempting to resolve them or spell them out. Are coordinates and coordinations opposite to one another? Or are they an example of the way poetry and music can exemplify the desynchronization through developing synchronization? In the first part of the book, the words phrase and phase occur simultaneously in both dissonance and resonance. In the part titled Matrices, grids, codes, and patterns spool out from repetition of the letter A, sounding again and again and differently. The word coordinate emphasizes the noun form of a point in a constellation, but coordination leans heavier into the verbal and multiple forms, emphasizes the profusion of points, the process of the process over the final result. On page 9 of Transverse, Lindsay writes what is both a gloss on the composer Steve Reich and an ars poetica for the book itself. Quote, to see the process itself as generative, to release the aesthetic object from the role of presenting an aesthetic final product. The page often performs a rupture across its center, coordinating text above and below, Korean on the left and English on the right, or grayscale or square brackets, silencing or holding space for a thought that exists there on the page, but remains unwritten. The book performs the process of translation, rather than translation as a final product, and holds the points of the coordination simultaneously. The book maintains the commonality between version and verse. Transverse, as Lindsay writes, combines trans and vertere to turn across, oblique, tangential, across, athwart. Transverse is in some ways a ritual because it is through ongoingness that it creates meaning. On page 13, the speaker says, quote, I'm always just constantly screaming, and there's absolutely no way to get it on the page unless I superimpose a large scream over the entirety of each page, which of course has complications thanks to the infinite scroll capabilities of web pages, I simply don't have an infinite scream. Lindsay's poetry is a scream that is never complete, but which engages the entirety of every page in its unfolding. It is a sound that goes beyond the construction of the citizen or the rights-bearing individual, that exceeds divisions of comprehension and incomprehension, of animacy and apparent inanimacy. The word moon, with 3 O's, makes moon into a process, into the experience of moon, and stretches it into an ongoing event. I feel lucky to be a listening point in the coordinations of Lindsay's thought tonight, to be caught up in the processes and matrices that their work makes possible. Please join me in welcoming Lindsay Choi.
Wow, thank you so much, Claire. I don't even know what to do with myself after hearing such a kind and generous introduction. Thanks also, Elliot, who has been helping me with all the audio stuff that's going to happen. And thank you, Holloway Committee. I'm really excited to be here and reading with Aditi Machado, whose work I really deeply admire. The first poem I'm going to be reading is something that I read at every reading because it helps me. It's called Plate, and it's for and after Anna Mostrovakis. Wine, flowers, revelry, to place in a wooden bowl which epic poets are to drink water from, while lyric poets may enjoy wine, and perhaps also flowers and revelry, without regard for carnage, or with heightened pleasure due to carnage. A particular vagueness entailed in kumquats, a precursor to grief, eggs in the nest of grief, which must also be placed in a wooden bowl to sun like flower water, wine collected from a wooden floor, glass in its truest shadow, not a cup, nor a vase, nor a jug, but a lung and sorrow, a bouquet or palette of particular monochrome colors, heartstake, pearl onion, more air, more moors, to relinquish dance, fall prey to love in the forgetting that all liquid must be fetched in a wooden bowl from a river into which one can never step twice and find the same river or sameness, though in the forgetting I have fetched body in a bowl from the very stream I have often peered for divination, though I have become uncertain if it is the same river, if it ever has been lined with birches, if the body I have brought back, if it is a body, if it become the same body, if the song I have whispered to the river, if it is indeed a song, if the wooden bowl I have fetched for love or grief or lamentation is the bowl that will fulfill this act of love, if it is an act of love to braid song, braid body, braid river, range. And now I'm going to be reading from a new project. That was from my first book, Transverse, and this is a project that's based on a series of translations of modernist Korean poet Sejong Ju's poem Mundungi, the Leper. And it starts with this epigraph. How small a thought it takes to fill a whole life. 해와 하늘빛이 문득이는 서러워 보리밭에 닿으면 애기 하나 먹고 꽃처럼 붉은 울음을 밤새 울었다. Sun, sky, light, leper, sorrow. Barley field, moon, float, baby, one, he eats. Like flowers, scarlet cries, all night he cried. Sun, sky, light, moon, night. Leper, baby, cries. Sun, sky, light, leper. Night cries. Sun, sky, light, leper, sorrow, moon floats. Baby eats night. Cries, cries, flower-like, all night. Like flowers, cries take the place of sleep. Sunrise, leper fills with flowers, leper fills with sleep. Dawn, leper is sorrow. When he moons over barley field, baby, one baby, he eats. Flowers, crimson, steal into the place of sleep. Dawn, sky, light, devours sun. Baby, flowers, baby floats over barley field, leper consumes, cries, like sleep. Flowers cry, the leper's sorrow. Sleep floats, scarlet. A baby endures the moon. 해와 하늘 비추 눈이는 서러워. 보리밭에 달 두면 애기 하나 먹고 꽃처럼 붉은 울음을 밤새 울었다. Let this be called the soul room, for it is where the soul leaves the body. In the periodical The Medical Missionary, Dr. R.M. Wilson reports from Gwangju, Korea, November 1914. According to scripture, the leper was outcast, but in Christ's time, he was the first to touch the leper. It is a superstition among the lepers that one can never be cured of leprosy until one has eaten human flesh. A policeman told me that he had to arrest a leper for taking the life of a child. I have a window at my desk, and every day quite a number come begging for treatment and saying, "Give me life, give me life. 살려줘, 살려줘." I had to put a curtain at this window because the picture became so horrible. One man who came to our station hungry, without food or raiment, and suffered things impossible to describe. He was put into a little ward where these patients died. The lepers call this the soul room because it is where the soul leaves the body. The arrival of Christian missionaries to Korea marked the beginning of medical modernity. With the introduction of their semiotic systems, leprosy took on new significance. Their mouths grew bloody with flesh. In the 2 years following Wilson's report, the Japanese colonial government, having occupied Korea since 1910, selected an island on the southeastern coast of the peninsula to convert into a national leprosium. Occupants were evicted from the island, after which 73 patients with leprosy were forcibly quarantined. By the 1940s, numbers had reached over 6,000. This leper colony was the site of forced sterilization, medical experimentation, torture, and enslavement, as lepers were forced to labor towards the Japanese war effort. Conditions of life in the leper colony appear as an intensification of colonial violence and disciplinary power exercised elsewhere on the mainland. And Jesus answered them, "Go and tell John what you hear and see. The blind receive their sight, the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the poor have good news brought to them. And blessed is anyone who takes no offense at me." Matthew 11:4-6. These categories of objection, we might suggest, come to represent the same basic metaphor, a carriage from the abject to the unclean, those who have no rights except to die, those whose only right is the right to die. This island is called Sorokdo. In Korean, Sorok means small deer, the island of small deer. Lepers were forcibly quarantined on Sorokdo until 1963. Only since 2007 has the island been accessible to outsiders. I want you to apologize. I want you to be accountable. I don't know what will suffice. In the end, I don't know what it would take for forgiveness, what conditions. I don't know if forgiveness is a concept adequate to the wrong. Some suggest that the appeal of judgment is the presence of an objective moral determinant and the eradication of all past wrongs, as if the sense of justice were one in which time is set to naught, as if a sense of justice were placed in the fruit, in the fullness of time. Confess to your wrongs. I want to hear you say. I want to hear you say that you were wrong. I am not sure if I want you to suffer. I want you to know, as if knowledge were adequate to. I want you to. I want you to. Imagine the worst thing you could do to someone. Now imagine the very worst. Investigation into the bones of ancient lepers reveals the presence of large amounts of mercury. This corresponds with the medical literature that reports the use of mercury as a treatment for leprosy. Some symptoms of leprosy include numbness, loss of sensation, loss of vision, paralysis. Symptoms of mercury poisoning include largely the same, as well as cognitive confusion. Mercury would be applied directly to the skin and to open wounds, seeping into the tender, unfeeling flesh. Because so many of the symptoms overlap, it is conceivable that physicians may not have noticed that their patients were dying not of leprosy, but of heavy metal poisoning. Pharmacon, the poison and the cure. I don't know where to begin a search for certain truths if they are documented. When I was a child, I asked my father about my great-grandfather. He told me that my great-grandfather had died decades ago. He had been part of the Korean resistance to Japanese colonization. He showed me a photograph of about 20 men. The photo was grainy and faded, no color, these faces rendered blank with time. He explained that because of one of these faded faces, because of this picture, because someone gave it to Japanese officials, all of the rest were assassinated. This photograph bore no survivors. He explained that one day my great-grandfather disappeared. His wife and sons eventually received notice that he was being held at a detention facility. The sons were invited to visit and came dressed in their formal best, wanting to honor their father. He was still alive, hung from the ceiling on meat hooks. My great-grandfather was tortured to death by the Japanese military. This is a question I don't know how to ask. This question is real, though I don't think I should ask. What would life be if this had never happened? My grandfather, one of the sons, became a military doctor and at the height of his career was the Surgeon General of Korea in the post-war period. He resigned after President Park Chung-hee, a military dictator, offered him a position as the head of Sorokdo. He died before I was born. A vicious alcoholic, someone who had borne witness to uncountable deaths. My grandfather, mine, he is unimaginable. There are stories and there are facts. I am in his bones. I do not know where he is buried. I have never known him. Do you believe that animals can feel pain? I do believe that animals feel pain. Some people, understanding that animals feel pain, take this as a basis to grant them rights. Animals, at the lower threshold of the ability to feel or cognize pain, many argue, might not be subject to the same argument for rights, an argument which mostly comes down to the right not to be consumed. The privilege of the ability to feel pain. There is the animal who bellows in pain. And there is the leper whose disease slowly removes physical sensation. Diana Hamilton, in her book God Was Right, writes, I, an or perhaps more accurately, quarantine of certain historical details. During the American nuclear attacks on Japan at the end of World War II, coinciding with the end of Japanese colonial rule in Korea, somewhere between 1/4 and 1/5 of the dead were Koreans who had been taken to Japan against their will as forced laborers or had settled into the cities after fleeing deprivation in their occupied homeland. As Choi Sung-hoon writes for the New York Times, those who survived and returned to Korea after the war were then shunned and denied medical care, partly to avoid upsetting the official American view that the nuclear attacks were necessary to liberate Korea. Some were banished to leper colonies. I had to put a curtain at this window because the picture became so horrible. Sun, sky, light. We track the transits of celestial bodies through tables of their spatial coordinates at given points in time. For some, this yields a sense of time itself. The movement within the elisions between points is where one might imagine the singing of the spheres. According to Plutarch, the Greek philosopher, Anaxagoras lends to the sun's rays a subtle whistling that makes voices more discomforting to hear during the day than at night. Sun, sky, leper fills with light. Scarlet flowers fill his mouth. Sun, sky, flowers, eat night, leper floats, moon-like. An infant grows scarlet with sleep. All night, the moon cracks and something slips out. Leper floats over a field of eggs. Like cries they flower in place of light. Leper floats. Every gesture becomes quotable. Let this be called the soul room. For they seeing see not, neither do they understand. Thank you.
Aditi Machado is an Indian poet whose books include Some Beheadings, which won the Believer Poetry Award in 2018, and a translation of Fairy Tali's Prosopoeia. Her two most recent chapbooks are Prologue, Emporium, and This Touch. Currently, she works as a visiting poet in residence at Washington University in St. Louis. One way we might describe Aditi Machado's Some Beheadings is as an ecology of thought. The mind resigns its role as a master arranger and recognizes its situatedness among the dappled, teeming, webbed collectivities that compose a world inseparably and often joyfully material and immaterial. States the speaker of one poem, "My head capitulates to them. Little plants, little events, that's how I think. A decapitation, a lovely guillotine lays my mind in the weeds." In these poems, to behead and to be beheaded is to surrender the supremacy of human thought to the vitality of the non-human, plants, the ground, landscape. Thinking goes on amid and not despite the nature of things, and with attempt to move with rather than instrumentally through the natural world. In this deconstructed hierarchy between thought and body, touch and materials interfaces become the sites of meaning. A bracken, a tongue meet as adjacent nouns in a poetic line. A body, like a cactus, experiences the landscape of the desert through metaphor's sympathetic leap from vegetable to the human. Something of the poet Lucretius's wonder at the self-generative and erratically autonomous combinatorics of the natural world resonates in Machado's poetics. From the western Ghats to leeches to pollen, Machado attends to the intertwining and coiling together of material entities to articulate an erotics of becoming. Grammar also becomes germinal, as verbs are nouned and nouns verbs, such as when Machado writes, "Attend thicket as it thickets," or there is a garden, I garden. Being and becoming, existing and acting, are inseparable processes. The speaker, while still subject to the humanoid container of the lyric I, finds themselves changed by the nouns they engage with. The garden rubs off on the speaker and forms the subject as much as the subject seems to form the world. And yet, to Machado's credit, such an articulation of mutual making does not disavow or pretend to resolve certain problems about poesis, particularly the violence that might potentially come with human creativity, language, and thought. We behead the world by putting it into an order and giving it arrangement, whether that be through the body's ingestion, the assertion of a conscious I, or the copular to copulate understanding. Not to evade, but to hold these troubling ideas alongside a deep attention to autonomous material life is among this collection's many uncountable merits. With meditational acuity, crystalline precision, and sustained attention to the slippages between categories of being and thought, Machado's poetry shows itself be more than capable to the task of thinking through thought, and how we also might rethink thinking. Please welcome Aditi Machado.
Thank you, Laura, for that beautiful introduction. I'm really very grateful for this moment and for everyone who made it possible. Jeffrey for inviting me, Alex for arranging so many details, and Mo's books, and people whose names I don't know involved in preparing this room. Thank you also to Lindsay for that really extraordinary reading, that moment where you said, imagine the worst possible, and the screen went blank. It was chilling. So thank you. I've been thinking increasingly that poetry is an act of public speaking. I understand a certain dimension of it as being this solitary work or something very private that gets overheard or spilled out into the public, but I'm finding that that definition works better for others than for me. And for me, poems are public works. So any occasion that has been made for me to read from my poetry feels like really an outrageous generosity. So this is a poem about public works of speech. Archaic. I thought this was a way, a new way. I wanted to call it human. Speech, speech, it's been wept before. It was a work to stand in the sun, that erosion. What is pain? Speech. After each time I lost the right under a legislature so commonly burdened. Speech, the only way is to turn outside, there a lip at the end of town, not the seashore. A new way, I kept thinking, a new grammar of replacement, not I'd rather be spit. Standing on my lip like a promontory, standing archaic. Standing on my lip like a promontory, why this staging? Why these dark lines of surplus harmony? These elastic expenditures, such supernumerary stars. So I could speech, I needed the staging of mouths opening like kinds, opening all kinds of meteors. Someone opened a space for me, but I asked for time. So long planets, so long plants. Then I spoke a sentence and ye took offense. I thought a new way, burnished, make that. Irresistible propaganda. I have nothing new for ye, but an ancient lattice work I wrought. So that's a poem from my book, Some Beheadings, and I'll read some more from it, and then some poems from a newer manuscript. So Some Beheadings is structured sort of loosely with these long poems in sequence called roots. And so I'll start with a poem from Root Thicket called Grace Excess. 1. Is there a sublime? That's my birdsong today. Is it imminent? That's why I wrote a page I doubted. Slipping on questions, all questions are gloves against rancid weather, gloves being grace. Grace, I think. Grace, I think I can feel it as image. The white of sheep invades a field. Grace not of, but as God, that unusable concept used in excess. 2. Look into excess. Watch that wanderer, watch him seed his grotesque plants. His eyes become the vines he becomes. Do I want an image with which to think asks, is matter abstract grit, a way to open up? Or do I want to touch something so I seize? Watch it seed like bamboo in the bamboo grove. Do I want to listen in the grove so loud, the grove becomes a loudspeaker, a lyric wet? That is a sublime, that is imminence, and excess, and incest, a prosperity, a bloom, isn't it? Here's another poem about speeches, or with speeches. Speeches minor. Something inwardly. Infinite rose, peeled and bliss. I walk as if moving will evaporate as if scent. Discomfort moves in the body like discourse, between sea and moor. The bad weather turns terminal. I think toward the sky and the bellies of underground creatures. This makes a dense paragraph of mist. Inside mist, what you see is neither truth nor untruth, but discussion rising into disillusion. Open speech. In a kernel, I admit I am deeply, but have not yet found my apathy. End speech. Sound bounces off railway tracks, ancient ritual of geometry. By the tracks opens a flower, refrain. The flower is general and particular and ancient. It satiates the erasure of a palm. There is a richness in saying everything we know. There is a richness in saying everything we know. The flower has opened a disparity in the earth that is granular. Refrain. In the medial moments, like a closing couplet, I said one thing and then another into a coliseum or a seashell. Open speech. I think of feeling as an act of purity. That I wind through cornfields and feel rustlings is incalculable. Though I have acted out of purity, I have not felt thought. Thought is not open to me, though I sense it from the edge of a field, watching the horses and the horses' masters. I have not been a slave to kindness. I watch horizons like blades. I watch the gorgeous animal of movement and its whip. I watch the gorgeous plant of movement and its whip. I cannot tell time without the whip. End speech. The whole village was there, minus its people. So this is Root Marienbad, which is one of the sequences, or the only one really, that I'll read in its entirety. And it's one that was written during a time of sleeplessness, and therefore makes a landscape out of sleeplessness. And I have this habit of quoting a lot of people in my poems, and if you see them on the page, they have the quotation marks. And so I can do that, but I think I better mention who I'm quoting this time. Okay, so the Marienbad quotes from Susan Howe, Gary Snyder, Iris Murdoch, Thomas Transtromer, in the translation by Robin Fulton, Lynn Heginian, and Maurice Blanchot. And the title of the poem is a very, very oblique reference to a film by Alain Resnais called The Last Year in Marienbad. Route Marienbad. When at night there are facts I would speak, as if water I would spill, I turn to curvature as silken as in pyretic, pollen for words the night. When reading is sleep, speech turns action into passive reception of the cornerstones I go beyond, the cliffs sharpening into profusion, assays made into such dense imagery in which I bear to move heat the kiln. That is, the objects emerging from a night of deep sleep, extreme listening in which the mind is a honeycomb equal the manifold foreign literatures I've been nursing. Walking is hard labor. Walking is the exact balance of spirit and humility. Description is epiphany. The moment I describe my day to myself as if I were perambulating through infinite foliage, a tender frottage, the opposite of claustrophobia, the moment I fall asleep obeys a literary convention I touch, explaining its features to myself. Absolute contradiction seemed at the heart of things, and yet the system was there. I sink into another elegant counterpoint. Restraint, dreams, restraint. Between Marienbad and the distant ocean, a single Baroque animal opens a pomegranate. Ancient colonies of ancient civilizations spill out as red beads. That we sleep plunges our work into the dark. Sometimes I work through a problem in sleep. Most often sleep is a problem phrased I cannot. In the dream I'm lost, a maze in the body of a rat. In the dream I'm bitten by a snake when I wake. Like thinking laterally, sleep postures. Night bus, odd, necessary circumcision, circumlocution, the way a thing moves, yields to its passengers. Half sleep, bitumen, darkness of roads, impenetrable lights, billboard of apostasy, extrusion of leaves, purity of signal. A thread occurs in my botany as rudiment and delicacy. A stamen bears pollen. I stand firm. The root grows into a trunk, grows into a branch. The stem grows into a stem, grows into a stem. In the sky's red canopy, the thread warps an occasion. The way I somnambulate, city weeds are phrenic, like the oldest languages telling me where to stop for sun's direction. To read a sentence, follow its grammar to the precipice from which it leaps into something like total surrender to a REM cycle. To misremember sleep, let the dream persist. That is, when the bones in your forearms split in two, keep the fragments and let your hand do full works. The bed, its roundness. Among its terrors, waking into man, waking into ant-like seriousness. Dreams do not disturb one's senses of humor, do they? Quatrains. Decisions of equal temperament. The sleep is going away to a corner of the system so it can be awake. Waking into wounded body is less terrorizing than how wonderfully 6 a.m. windows of dark light. The one fully awake individual is sexually involved. a casement for the involution to be regarded. Nexus of glorious morning alarum, sleep and speech, creeping of sunny days back into the pocket. To speak means how much wakefulness, want for iron-cast commitment to this investigation. Dormavelia, commas and dreams. Can you wake up from a sentence like you wake up on the porch? Those who sleep poorly seem always more or less guilty. What do? They make the night present. When at night the woods burn toward a gold of rolling fields, fallow light does what eyes do turned inside out. When at night the curvature worms itself, facts spill into blue sheets, sinewy as the one going under them, explicating fire as figure for what must die in order that inner become outer. The wrought manners in which I say I fell asleep, and don't know how, but the sheets were warm and I felt a mild decadence, an explicit industry as that of bees. I sleep and wake and sleep and wake, and this is prosody. As I begin to believe in materials less as textile and more as touching, everywhere is a kind of terror or lust. There are 6 minds employed here, and the 6th is the least ephemeral and substantial. As I attempt to extricate myself from the sheets, I make a place like a deep place in water. Sound moves as it should. Through these strata, some diagonal light, dry trapezoids. White questions flare, aging dandelions. All right, I'm gonna read from some new work that's different. I think it's different. I'm calling it Emporium, and when I do the kind of ugly work of sort of having to describe what it is, or like worse, like having to pitch it to someone, I describe it as a story, or that there's a speaker who is journeying on a kind of 21st century Silk Route. And I say Silk Route because it's a transnational journey, and there's a lot of silk and objects. It's very anachronistic. And the speaker, she tends to linger at certain types of places. They're very often marketplaces and emporia, hence Emporium. And she's extremely interested in objects and money. And I'll actually read some of the, there are these bits of ephemera that surround the longer, more poemy poems, and the ephemera just give me more joy in a way, so I'll read those first. And I think they also just sort of give more of a sense of the interest in objects and money. So this is a very short one to start things off. It's a grocery list, or actually more of a receipt. So it goes like this: spuds, raffia, iodine, rock crab, fiduciary limes, pansies, quinine, flecked gum, persimmons, fenny, rack of lamb, deck of mortuary cards, rags to stuff up your red time, 12 annas. And an anna is an obsolete form of currency from the British Raj, which is worth nothing unless you're a coin collector. Okay, the second ephemera poem is sort of excerpts from a longer thing, and this is a little sort of recipe book / meditations on gustatory things that the speaker finds in a flea market for 20 cents. And the title of this, so imagine, I don't know if anyone's ever had a relative or personally been part of a ladies' club where they type up recipes and then they photocopy them and staple them. My mother had a bunch of those, so it's kind of inspired by that, and it's also inspired by the alleged first known cookbook by this Roman gourmand called Apicius, and the Latin title of that work translates as Concerning Matters Culinary, so that's what I used for my object as well. So, from Concerning Matters Culinary. The tuna, seared a bit uneven, sits cadmium in fine sheets of guava. A leaf of curry, a scent of lime evades detection. Derelict knoll coal ribbons on a shallow plate. Brief interludes of tender coconut round out the salad. Salted juniper berries eye the mild white peaks having into a valley dropped from tremors. Tender scent of lime. Was this not meditative? Such lips peeling back the elements, and the scallions that wither in my arms. So that I measure this adventure, so that I ferment. Apples sicken. In one place, the fig rolls over and I stem the tide. And because basil does not yield to flesh, horses take to streets. The bright burns on this lettuce recall someone herbaceous, someone severed. So memory. So baited the soliloquy, burnt buckle clam. Two elements. The trifling beef set upon a cauliflower puree. The ineffable curry leaf infusing it refuses this appropriation. Terrific. And so I thought I was witness to something within me when the platter arrived with its fish and crab and tamarind flowers dripping juices oceanic. Arrived, set in curd, a candied gooseberry. Arrived in a gel, the glossed eyes of a fish. Arrived the peculiar feeling my thoughts were infusing the food and not the other way around. Was this not meditative? That I turned and put the cat away? That I savored every bite and never spat nothing out, though they were at times items too crude upon the palate and several monotone or burnt. And scallions wither in my arms. Were those not my lips, saccharine, left dumb to yours, O peach mouth, in which I macerate? I'm full of vice, the erstwhile pig crackled. What sort of corridor into the soul is a knife to the belly? I go crazy for lack of precise instruments. Interludes of lime. Bitter beet paint, beet face of animal. Plums underwent this. There is death folded into my mousse today. But do, yes, induct the olive into yourself, and keep plump every berry, currant, pickled slaw, and lush your advances. I'll be my own still fruit. Left alone with my pudding, impossible sweetmeats prolong the moment. Life without scallions, a saga. So that confusion is primordial, vinaigrettes. It is not, I find I am saying, that I don't love you, but these rabbit brains are so delicately floating islands on this milk of goat, the terrible pastoral garnish buckles under. I've lived for this, and you have not. Let's part. Adscriptio. So that I do not obsess. So that I do not obsess over the fig. I place it on a rim. so that I do not forget the fig. I move it, it bursts. The sap of figs is cruel. The way they are wrapped is cruel. They burst, so that I learn kindness. The fig, the fig. All right, so this is the poem, Emporium. As if I could simply pass through the carts, hand myself over to some notions piled on a cart, trade away certain desires amid the silk and squid, certainty like a quality of gems and cautious doctrines. Trade away myself, wouldn't be too unlovely in derivative light, lamps all succulents above the general meat, would it, butchers, for tartan weather or any grid-like complexity of time and back to square home. The sugar makes a mound there as once bright pyramids, and the smells here are superlative, all brine and depth as though one upon the other we afflorist, and the tapestries descend, and wouldn't we endlessly such velvet landscapes by? As if I could simply stay here with the provocations, and if I did, what would I sell? And would I look at the mongers and hooks? Would I love these men? I would. Love now is not so corralled, and distance dreams itself out of longevity. Bowie strings a violin. A neat bird suggests the littoral. The limes settle into excellence. Come on, Eros, airily. Why not the Emporium? The chief comparison is to a quality of light. The people have not poured in as light, won't pour out. The poet's stall, vending short texts and long texts, scarves run through bodily fluids. We live in the clusterfuck. The chief definitions are here now. The chief epics are of markets spinning, carnival eyes, pastimes replete with blinds. The chief binaries fold and unfold. The garden in the kitchen is in the street. Sweet herbs and cow patties. Sweetness, the provocation and chief style of the poets. The extent to which history inscribes industrial products is perfume, one writes, cupping silver. Petals, petroleum, idioms, profuse entangled in the neck, a goblet. History paves the Emporium and pours the gemlight. And says the purveyor, best not study such shapes, but silk, to me of silks, of the brushing of blouses against silken nipples, of between her legs the stolen red. And even money isn't quite like money when silk buys me, or have I it, or has it blended in the fabrics of, when there was a room for me to try on there was weather then, and now too, it's silking my mind, and the qualities as they continue are the silk under the hand, reads the libel. Silk, that's the dual error and shock of new precision. And involuntary, not involuntary exactly, but desired frisson. I've pulled the brocade off the rack. Accents ascend the sound field. Bonny suns climb the vaulted ceiling, magnets. My senses, cursive, seek an angle. Sensing danger, name an enemy, nylon. Or did I mean history? Did I mean shale? And of what is it collaged? How does it cohere? Sudden queries, sudden as vendors. Do they sell fruit? Sell textile? I've been so exact, I've cut corners. Oh, obsolescence. Oh, light brain, sifting the accidental tree. I desire cinema, in a sense. All factories sense the dilemma. Ought I shove off? The Emporium moves by shift of wind, shuffles its constituents, atomizes in concept, not material. Yet how suggestive, how like a pleasant sea that finds spray. Right, last poem, and I'll end with the beginning. So this is the prologue to Emporium. Prologue. I came along a silk route. I came low like low things. Slow, farcical leaves rimmed the trees. Some chic birds came along a long way, bolstered by merchants and prophylactics, and a sort of very obscure shade that became my practice. I'd stop sometimes to confer with magnolias and found the writing on the margin creeping in. Or I'd look up at the archive, wandering hysterically like a womb. I'd stop at markets where rank matadors offered me coins. Magnalia, Magnalia. I heard those bards. I loved those shops. Little bourgeois vessels of amnesia and maybe lockets. And sometimes I'd stop at theaters and watch the facsimile faces twatting by, the customary graffito on a restaurant tile. I'd forget my resistances, small wrists, and gussy up my deadlocked tongue. Nothing to see here, I'd say, but virtuoso shrubs. And along the silk route upon which I came the very neat devices of a memoirist or a politico. And the silkiness of the route was of an old time, colored like old colored photographs, with seepages into the corners of sight. Silk either wore me down or bore me out of a series of vacancies in which I scanned beaches. I was caught. Who caught me but a phantom certainty? Certainty like a quality of gems and cautious doctrines. This was my distraction, and having to tighten my belt and all that. And yet I was arriving, words reappearing on points of fact. Prickly or vine-like, I proposed this and that. I was told nation or rhapsody or wear simple clothes. I heard those statements as limpid fugues, traumas wandering out of musical bars. I had no purchase on those points. And for a while it was impossible to wear silk. I'd look up at the rouged sky, I'd consider the Jesuitic races, the long lines of walks sniffing, the climate refusing to change, the clematis reminding me I was to pursue a sound. I was to gussy up my deadlocked tongue. I was to steal along, barter my socialisms for some mastic, or gâteau slicked with rum, or a velvet speculum, or a sort of very erudite and algebraic, any sort of very telluric sort, a sort of any sort, a sottise, any sort of sottise. So I bartered my socialisms for something hierarchic, something hemorrhagic, hagiocratic, hermetical, helical, heretical, hieratic, higher, hieroglyphic, heteronymous, higher, hair, hairy. It was a hairy time. And my bush was a mulberry bush. It occasioned silk. Silk was a duration. I unpacked it. Finally arriving, tender glissade, lowing in the fields, rennet skies. Up ahead, the Emporium up ahead. All those haptic divinities, all those sounds I came to quell, asking, le sang, questionnant, le sang. Comment, quelle laine, quel lin, quel coton, quel satin, quel crin, quelle chanvre, quel cachemire, quel velours, quel tweed, quelle flanelle, quelle dentelle, quel calico, quelle mousseline, quel serge, quelle jute, quel jacquard, quel brocart, quel cuir, quel soie, quel soie, quelque soie, quelque soie, quel soie. Thank you.
Thank you to Claire Marie and to Laura for their introductions, and to Aditi and Lindsay for your work. Owen and Noah from most books are here. Please consider the poems in 3 dimensions, and come talk to the poets, and come back on April 17th for Colonialism. Thank you. Good night.